So in this video, we're going to go over some of the layer properties in a little bit more detail, and I'll show you some things that you might be questioned about or assessed on your certification exam involving layers. So again, if you do want to open up a completely blank drawing with no layers associated with it, you're just going to click on the word templates here and then click on a CAD. And that will open a completely blank drawing with no layers associated with it. And then here we have our layer properties that we can open up. Thank you. It was taking a little while to load. That we can open up and add new layers and some new settings for it. So to add in a new layer is this button right here. Right next to it is where you can add a layer that's frozen in viewports. So what a frozen layer does is it means that it's not currently visible. So like all of the line work's there, but in a specific viewport, which is a window that looks into an object, which we'll go over when we go over printing and plotting, that layer wouldn't be visible. So you can have lines that are visible in some of those windows, but not visible in other ones. That's very helpful when we have a three-dimensional object in AutoCAD and we're then projecting it to be two-dimensional, which is a little bit more complex than what we'll do in this course. But with something like that, we are going to have several viewports and we want line work to only show up in some of them. The button right next to it is how you would delete a layer. And then you can also set layers to be current. So you can either double click on layers in this list to set them. You can pick from here, or so I'll just make another layer called layer 1. And if I have layer 1 selected and I click on that button, you see how that check mark moved to layer 1. So that just means layer 1 is now my one I have it set at. If I do a fast double click, that also will set our layers, but we typically choose from just this drop down here. Now, remember too that if you're ever questioned about any of these on your exam, you can just hover over any of the buttons and it will tell you what the button is. So if they ask, which one of these is the new layer button and you're unsure, just go into your layer properties and look at the different buttons to see which one it would be. So the next setting that's in just this list for layers is turning a layer on or off, which is this light bulb, and you can click on it in layer properties, or you can choose from this drop down. This is something that they love to ask about in the practice problems, so I'm going to assume they'll also most likely ask about it on the actual exam. And so for some of the practice problems, we see things like this, where we've got these boxes all with different colors, and they'll say turn off layer 3. And so if I go to this drop down and I just click on this light bulb next to layer 3 and they want to know, which box disappears. Or they might say turn off layer 1, turn off the draw layer, layer 4, or something like that. Maybe they might even say turn off layer 0. Now, because I have my object currently set to layer 0, if I click on that light bulb, it's going to warn me, hey, this is the layer you're currently in. Do you want to turn it off? And I'll say, sure, I do. And then if you don't see anything change, you might want to type in the command regen to refresh the drawing. And then they'll say, which box disappeared or which box did this or that. And then I'll just turn this layer back on. The reason why they're warning you about turning off your current layer is because, so let's say I do turn this layer off. Now if I go into the line tool and I draw some things, nothing's showing up. So it looks like I've drawn nothing. I've just made a big mess over here in the corner. Let me hit escape to end the command. However, once I turn the layer back on, all of that is going to be there. So I did draw things in that layer. It's just because I had that layer's visibility turned off that we couldn't see anything associated with it. So again, let's look at in this file, if I go to the custom view, believe it's this one called layer properties. Yep. So it's kind of a similar scenario where they want us to turn a specific layer off and see which one of these boxes disappears. So we have this one on the green layer. This one is in this site layer, this else layer, and this is in layer 0. So I figured that out by just clicking on each of them and just looking up here. So if I click on the box, I can see that it's in the layer called green. They just overrode the property to be red. So for this instance, they might ask me to go to my drop down, turn off the layer 0, and I'll say turn the current layer off. And they'll say which box disappeared, and it doesn't look like any box disappeared. But if I type in the command regen to refresh my drawing, I can see that box 4 disappeared. And I'll just spam Control Z to get that drawing back to its original. So that is just how the light bulb layer works. Now, right next to it is the freeze and thaw layer. So let's just click on layer properties. So what freeze/thaw does is it allows things to just go away and come back, similar to on or off. So if I freeze a layer, sorry, it's saying I can't do it to layer 0, but if I freeze a layer, that little snowflake pops next to it. And if I go on layer 1, it says you can't do anything in that layer because it's frozen. So a frozen layer can't be used, can't be changed or anything. So if I click on it again to thaw it out, and I go into layer 1, and I draw a circle with it, switch myself back to layer 0, freeze layer 1, it goes away, it still is there, but it's now just frozen. So that means that it's kind of just there in the background, and then I could eventually bring it back. So I might do a freeze thaw for layers associated with like furniture or other layouts, maybe dimensions, where I can just kind of freeze them. So that way I can't see them currently. They're out of my way, but they still exist in the drawing. Then that last option that we yet to look at is the lock and unlock. So if I lock a layer, we can see that it kind of dulls it a bit. But furthermore, I can select it, and if I try to delete it, so if I click on it to try to erase it, it won't let me erase it because it's on a locked layer. If I try to go move it, I can't click on it to move it because it's in a locked layer. So when a layer is locked, it's still visible, but it can't be altered or changed in any way, shape, or form. So as a teacher, I might use locking layers to set up some sort of guideline for students that they can still reference. So for instance, if I was to go draw a line, I can still reference that center point to draw a line off of it, but then you as the student couldn't go and alter that original circle or piece unless, of course, you went to go unlock the layer itself. So lock can be helpful if you're doing a drawing with multiple people and maybe you don't want them touching the original work, or you have or if you're in a scenario where you're a teacher and you have students that you maybe don't want altering too much of the original pieces on your work. So that is the on-off, the freeze and thaw, and lock and unlock. Now plot we went over last time, but just to reiterate, plot means that either a line will print or not print. And so plot can be helpful when you have guidelines and work on your drawings that maybe you just don't want to go through and erase. So you can set them up to just not print out. Then the color the layer appears in your drawing, the line type it appears at, and the line weight it would have. So some examples of things they might ask related to that are in a scenario like this where they might give you a drawing and they may say, you know, select the lines labeled as cabinets. So that would be like these lines here. They might ask you to select one of them or select all of them. And they might tell you to change the properties of the line type to by layer. So when I click on this line, it's telling me that it is a cabinet line. But right here in the properties bar, I can see that they override the line type to be a continuous line. So if I scroll all the way up and say by layer, I can see that this line type is actually not continuous. It's this pattern of dash dot dot. And then they might say, which one of these scenarios does it look like? And I can say that, okay, it's the same as line 2. So that might be a case where I could also find that answer, which that's a little hidden, but I could find this answer without even switching this over, because if I click on this line, I can see that the layer is called cabinets, and I can go into the layer properties and see what line type the cabinet one is. So again, to show you how in another scenario where they might try to trip you up a little bit with that, not in this one, but I believe there's a file called empty floor plan. Yeah, in this one, for practices, they had a couple ones associated with layers where they wanted to know, you know, what layer was, let's say for instance, this circle. And they said like, what line type is the desk layer? So when we're in the layer desk, we can see here that the line type says border, but that's not the line type for the layer itself. So in this scenario, if I clicked on the layer properties, I can see that the desk layer by default is in the continuous line type. So they purposefully reset it to be this border one to try and trip you up a little bit with your layer properties. Another thing they might ask about is just, you know, how many objects are in a layer itself. So they might ask, you know, how many objects are in this layer called desk, which I can count that there's 1, 2, 3, 4. But still, since we've seen that they can change these properties up, it could very well be that, you know, one of these windows or one of these doors is in fact in the desk layer, but they just changed it to be blue to try to trick us. So one thing we can do there is highlight the entire object and ignore all those constraints that pop up. And here in our properties bar, we can use the quick select option to filter out things that we're selecting. So we could filter out to just say I only want circles or I only want this, but I can also filter out by the color or the layer or the line type. So in this instance, I'd want to filter out by layer, and I would just want to say that the layer has to be the desk layer. And I'll say okay, and it deselected everything that wasn't in that desk layer, and I can see then here that I have 4 objects in that layer. And we can see things like that for a multitude of things. So for instance, in a practice question, they ask how many circles are here. So you could sit and count every one of these circles, but that's going to take a lot of time, and your exam is timed. So one thing I could easily do is just select everything, and I could come to this drop down and see just quickly that there's 17 lines, 41 circles. But even then, if I wanted to use the quick select option, I could say that I only want circles selected, and then for the operator, I could say that I want only ones that are blue. In this scenario, I could say only ones that are not blue. If I wanted to maybe do it based on a specific diameter, I could say I want only ones that are bigger than this particular size, smaller than this particular size, not this size or this size. I'll just leave it as all circles. and then it'll deselect all the line work, and I can see that there's 41 circles. So without having to count, I could just easily apply things for a particular layer, a particular type, a particular circle. So that quick select in your properties can come in handy. So that's just a couple of different ways you can refer to your different layers and properties. So you can see here we've got a frozen layer, and if I click on that, it then gives me a nice little perimeter. So maybe they say like, oh, you know, what is the outside layer referring to? They might ask a question like that. And so you can go to your layer and you could thaw it out or unfreeze it and see what it is. And then our on off and our lock and unlock, as well as then just the different properties associated with it. So for this assignment, there is a little quiz associated with those different layer properties, just to kind of make sure that you are familiar with what the different functions do, how to add layers, how to delete layers, how to switch layers. And if you need any help or have any questions with the assignment, let me know, and I'll see you in the next one.